We're going to talk about Charlotte Perkins Gilman. First, we're going to introduce you to her by telling you a little of her life. She was born in Connecticut. Her father abandoned her mother and siblings shortly after her birth, leaving the family to struggle in poverty and emotional abandonment. Charlotte received very little education as a result, but she was an avid reader of history and literature, and also she was inclined towards art. She studied at Rhode Island School of Design in Providence, Rhode Island, and began working as a designer of advertising cards for business and as a children's tutor. In 1884, Charlotte marries an artist, Charles Stetson. The marriage was a failure from the beginning. She rejected the traditional accepted rules for married women during the 19th century. She refused to submit to a life devoted to the duties of housekeeping and obedience to one's husband. She decided to focus on painting and writing poems, essays, and short stories. Oppressed by her unhappy marriage and experiencing what today is known as postpartum depression, Charlotte was taken to the neurologist with Dr. Silas Ware Mitchell, who was known for his rest cure. This treatment consists of social isolation, prescribed rest and tranquilizers, and forbade engagement in any form of intellectual stimulation, such as art, reading, and writing. Charlotte rejected this treatment and she decided to leave her husband and move to California with her daughter. Later on, she began speaking on policy on social issues, including the equal treatment of women. In 1900, she remarried to George Cleman, who was supportive of her social political views. This marriage was happier than the first one. Once married, she continued her crusade for women's rights by writing for several feminist publications and giving lectures on repression of women. She also lectured on the topics of poverty, healthcare, civil justice, and labor rights. And today, and my classmate is going to talk you about her works.
Okay, so the historical and social context with Charlotte Perkins Gilman, even though she started writing in the late 1800s, she was positioned in the modern period due to her unorthodox ideas in this case. But in case of history, a lot of things were happening at the time, even coming from protests, movements, involvement from government. In this case, Margaret Thatcher, she was first prime minister in British. There was a lot of social change, a lot of wars, well, in this case, two world wars, a Cold War, um, a lot of violence, a lot of revolutions, and most of it, several authors publishing several, in this case, literary works. Her type of writing in this case was cataloged as she always talked about themes of women being underestimated, a lot of mental health, and as I former said, she was cataloged of having an utopian thinking. She was such an inspiration because she led several types of groundwork for future feminists. She was such an important activist. In this case, as I former said, her books were cataloged as unorthodox and she had a lot of dominant ideas. She shaped the movement of women's suffrage and rights in this case. She was 100% involved in this case. And a lot of the times she attended to certain conference of reform and physical protest. And well, as I said, her books were, in this case, a literary movement for feminism.
So she made many major works. However, we will be analyzing Women in Economic and Herland. Women in Economic was published in 1898. The writing gave an impact on others since Gilman incorporated an analysis of the relationship between the position of women and the larger community. The book touched a few dominant themes: the transformation of marriage, the family, and the home. However, when Gilman committed to this writing, she intended to give a lesson on changing society by insisting on an ethical, rational, natural order that acknowledged and encouraged mothering as its basis, regardless of sex. In this writing, it is learned that in order to survive in this society, women must change their cultural identities. And she demonstrated how women have been forced to become dependent on men. A famous quote from this book is: "There is no female mind. The brain is not an organ of sex," as well as speak of a female liver. She refused the label feminist and instead embraced the term humanist, believing it important to promote justice for all. In the case of Herland, she wrote it in the United States and it was published in 1915. The impact that Gilman made was an important lesson when she wrote Herland, as she showed that society is unjust to women and does not allow them to achieve their full human potential. She makes an emphasis that women's lives are to consume by difficult, unremunerated woman work, such as childbearing, child rearing, and domestic labor. Gilman creates in the story a means of equality for the man and at times conveys a theme of being superior to the man. In contrast to the world where the men came from, they feel weak compared to the women of Herland. Gilman explores women reproductive control and its benefits through Herland. In this case, a famous quote of this book was, "Why this is a civilized country. I protest, there must be men." Gilman shows how the idea that any society could exist and thrive without men is completely outside the realm of possibility for men. Their sexism is completely ingrained in that they assume women are not able to thrive on their own, and they go as far as to suggest that women will be too jealous to succeed. Well, thank you for watching our video.